Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Hawkamah's 14th annual conference. We are really very happy to have you back with us today. Yesterday, we had some very inspiring sessions, panelists who shared experiences with us, and we were happy to receive your questions and comments during the day. So please keep that coming in today. Now, I would like to introduce today one of really our key experts and resources at Hawkamah. Stephen Davis is not only a senior fellow of Harvard Law School, but for us, he has been supportive to Hawkamah since day one. I remember I met Stephen. I listened to one of his presentations in Hawkamah's annual conference in Oman in 2010, or even 2009. Stephen Davis is also the co-chair of Hawkamah's International Advisory Board, and he has been on the editorial board of Hawkamah Journal since its inception. So Stephen is an expert, a researcher. He is actually a person who experts wait for his articles and insights so that they understand more governance, and definitely is one of the people that we are learning from regularly. So we are really lucky to have Stephen Davis with us today. He will give us a keynote address now, and then he will also chair the first session of the day. Stephen Davis, thank you so much for being with us. I'd like to hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ashraf, for those much too kind remarks. And thank you to Dr. Ahmed and the board and the terrific Hawkamah team. And I'm delighted to be here with so many distinguished participants today. So my talk is titled The Missing Pieces of Corporate Governance. E and S in particular is what I meant to focus on. But I want to kind of start with a question as to why we are today, as Phil Armstrong said yesterday, at a moment when E, S, and G are so hardwired into the capital market and have become permanent features of the capital market. Why is that? It's a bit of a mystery, I think, in many ways. But the reason, I think, is this. It may not be a missing reason, a missing piece, but it is a hidden one, and it's certainly a very much an under-recognized one, and that is that there's a powerful force remaking corporate governance, especially in the developed world. And it's a rising new investor class with very different, actually radically different expectations of their investor agents than their parents had or their grandparents had. And that's a profound difference. And it is powering some profound change in the capital market. But let me give you a couple of examples, data points, if you will. 75% of millennials, according to surveys, want investments to do social good. So in other words, they want to make money as their parents, their grandparents did. But in addition to that, they want a social dimension to their investments. 75% of millennials, according to surveys. Interestingly, too, women are twice as likely as men, again, according to surveys, to consider investments that deliver both positive returns and make a positive impact. Now, why are those numbers important? It's because over the next several decades, some 30 trillion US dollars of wealth is expected to be transferred to millennials. And within 10 years, 66% of consumer wealth in the United States will be controlled by women, and that's according to Oppenheimer funds. So these are big changes in the culture of investments, and they underlie everything else that is happening. It is, in fact, because of this profound grassroots generational change that ESG now is so much a permanent feature. But in particular, for today, in my brief remarks, I'm going to talk about how that change, that generational change, is producing, in turn, three great transformations in the capital market. First, that investors are moving rapidly to active stewardship. We'll talk about that in a moment. Secondly, the second great transformation is that there's a wave of new benchmarks, standards, and rules by governments, private bodies, and NGOs that affect ESG. And the third great transformation that I'll speak about today is the vast new array of measurement tools that are available to issuers, to corporations, and to investors in applying ESG. So those are the three great transformations that now make ESG part of the architecture, and not just in developed markets, but because the capital market is global, companies across the GCC will also be affected. So let me start with the first great transformation, which is stewardship. Stewardship is the exercise of responsible care by an agent acting on behalf of an ultimate owner. That's the technical definition, but really what it is as we know in the investor world, trading, the buying and selling of shares is a common part of the of capital management. But what has arisen parallel to the trading discipline is the discipline of stewardship. In other words, what do you do with shares when you own those shares? And that means not just voting your shares as an investor, but also engaging with companies and actually engaging with other players as well. There are now codes, more than 24 codes around the world that recommend how shareholders should behave as owners or apply stewardship. And this is not just a marginal exercise within the investor world. I looked at some recent statements by some of the largest funds in the world, BlackRock and State Street Global Advisors. I'll just cite one, but they're all similar. State Street's CEO last year sent out a letter that, among other things, said, "We believe a company's ESG score will soon effectively be as important as its credit rating." That's a very important comment, and it again is of a piece. BlackRock has said pretty much the same thing. Now, it's one thing to say an aspiration, it's quite another to see what happens on the ground. And the fact is, as the Financial Times had a headline about a year ago, the headline said, "Jobs bonanza in stewardship and sustainable investing teams." And what that was about is the fact that investors, big institutions in particular, have doubled the number of people who work on stewardship between 2017 and 2020. These were marginal players, these so-called stewardship professionals within funds. Now they are very much a part of the architecture. Question is, are boards ready? And we have examples in climate, and we have examples in other ways that investors have exercised stewardship. We have net zero climate, as I say, in particular. The big dramatic turning point was this last year when Exxon, because of an investor campaign, lost a vote and lost 3 directors to insurgent investors. So stewardship is taking a toll on companies that are not ready for it. And the same thing is true for health and diversity. Big funds want boards to diversify, and COVID in particular has raised questions about health and safety, and what's known as human capital management. Second big transformation, benchmarks, standards, and rules. The old public policy model was that, especially after the financial crisis, is governments should empower investors to take on the policing of markets. Now it's, yes, let's empower investors, but it's also time for governments to step in with new rules. We see the EU doing this with the taxonomy that's being developed on environmental and other issues. The Biden administration's taken a U-turn, much more interventionist, and there's a lot more requirements on boards to adopt new standards. And that's not just from government. We know from the private sector, there's a tide of ESG standards coming towards boards. More than 230 standard setting initiatives are underway. Stock exchange listing rules, index providers, and as I mentioned, investor and NGO coalitions. So the third great transformation that I would mention is the measurement tools that exist. And Bloomberg terminals now offer 140 million ESG data points. So what used to be an ethereal notion, yes, we want companies to be responsible on various issues, ESG issues. Now there is hard data to back it up. So you have a vast new industry of detailed sector-based ESG research by boutiques, by legacy consulting giants on water use, emissions, employee turnover, brand trust. You name it, it's there. So it's not necessarily coordinated. Much of it is in contradiction, but this is a new industry that is affecting the market. So the question is, how do boards keep up? How do they address this? One of them is that there's an implication for these great transformations on board composition. Is the board prepared? Is it well equipped? Is it fit for purpose for these kinds of transformations that now affect it? Companies may need to prepare an ESG balance sheet. They may need to put R&D into ESG, just as they might look at put research and development funds into products that they make. They may also want to look at how do you address ESG? How do peers best address ESG in various markets? And then figure out how to adapt those the best ideas to the market and to the company. And the other implication, I think, is that there needs to be two-way communication with investors, both at home and abroad, and to consider the goodwill benefits of such goodwill, especially in a crisis such as we've had with COVID. I'll stop there. There's a lot to discuss and to unpack, and I'm delighted that following these remarks, we will have a terrific panel who will be able to lend insights far greater than my own. So thank you very much for joining me. And again, thank you to Hawkamah. Thank you to all of you distinguished participants.